Hey everyone, Duke New with 3D here with not a review, a rant, or a restoration, but just sort of a general gas mask related topic. I already covered this topic in my mint condition M2-10A1 Army diaphragm mask video, and that is pretty much the topic of the strange, I don't know the exact designation, I've been calling this the C11 diaphragm angle tube, but we don't know the actual designation of these, but really it's just this diaphragm assembly's compatibility with the M2 Optical series masks. So, as some of you may know, the M2 or the M2-10A1-6 lightweight optical mask was designed sometime around 1944 as a replacement for the older M1 series optical masks in use with the U.S. Army and most of the ground forces of the U.S. military. Due to needing a lighter weight mask, it is not as cumbersome and ungainly as the M1 optical, which had the filter suspended behind the head, similar to the Navy diaphragm masks. The main thing that differs the World War II and the post-war M2 opticals is this right here. This is actually the C11 diaphragm angle tube assembly, which is made out of a cast, I assume aluminum, it could be brass, I don't really know, it could even be steel for all I know. I'm not even sure what this is, I haven't tested its ferrous capabilities, but this metal diaphragm angle tube assembly houses a C15 style exhalation valve, which is sort of patterned off of the early World War II style, but it's not entirely the same, but very similar. But anyhow, these are the more common ones you'll see. The actual World War II M2-10A1-6s, or as they're more commonly referred to, the M2-10-6, will have a gray plastic diaphragm and M8 outlet valve assembly similar to this M3A1. Now I know several people, or at least a couple people, have tried to replicate M2, or I guess I'm just going to call them World War II M2 opticals, because as far as I know, M2-10-6 is not the correct designation. The designation M2-10-6 was pretty much started by Bart Wilkes, aka Le Masque Gaz, or gasmasks.net, however you prefer to know him by. I don't really know. I know of several collectors who have a quote-unquote M2-10-6, which is, again, the World War II M2-10A1-6, but I've never actually had any confirmation that they have M10 canisters, because the middle of the designation will refer to the canister used with the mask, and obviously M2-10A1-6 uses an M10A1 lightweight filter, as you can see here, but I have not actually seen any physical evidence. I've seen the canisters themselves, but just not any close-up of the markings or any kind of word-by-word approval, or whatever you want to call it, stating that these masks, or these World War II variants, use the M10 canister, because from what I know, the M10 canister had a very, very short service life. I believe it was introduced with the original M3-10A1-6 lightweight service masks, which were made out of the Class B gray rubber, and then they were soon sort of, not really disposed of, they just kind of updated them due to some flaw or some other issue, but anyhow, yeah, so as far as I know, both the World War II and this post-war variant of the M2 Optical are both called M2-10A1-6, at least until further notice. I'll keep you guys posted on that. Anyways, back to my original point. So anyways, people have been trying to make reproductions of the World War II variant by simply taking a trashed, barn-fresh M3 diaphragm, like this example, taking the the diaphragm angle tube off and swapping it onto the facepiece. And a lot of people have found that this simply will not work. Why? Well, obviously this one right here, this is a, let's see, what is this? A 1942 contract M3A1 diaphragm. So it's a fairly earlier one, and as you can see, I'm restoring this one, so I have all the parts disassembled. I'm going to be replacing the tape and wire. But anyways, as you can see here, here's the diaphragm assembly isolated, and it's pretty typical fare. It's another issue with these. You can see the warping right here. Time does not lend itself well to these early plastic diaphragms. As you can see, they warp very heavily, and in a lot of cases, like on my M3A1 here, the valve cage will be completely locked up, and I have to use, like, I have to stick, basically what I do is I have to jam a pair of tweezers in between the spokes here, and this is very dangerous to do. You have to be very careful and have a very steady hand when you're doing this, or else you could very well break the plastic. And I was kind of fully expecting this plastic to break, but I have spare valve cages, so it wouldn't be too big of an issue, but luckily nothing broke when I was doing this. So anyways, back onto the point. These plastic diaphragm angle tubes, as you can see, if you look very closely, they do not line up. This is entirely way too small for the M2 Optical. And why is this? Well, at first I thought there was a number of different reasons. One, maybe they were producing a larger size of these specifically for the M2-10A1-6s for that time period. Or they were making the diaphragm ports on the World War II variants somehow smaller so that it could accommodate these plastic diaphragms better than the C11 that was later used. But as it turns out, as evidenced on my M3A1 Army diaphragm mask that is mint unissued and dated 1943 to 44. They later on did contract these plastic diaphragm angle tubes to be slightly larger. You can sort of see it on the camera here, how this one is just a couple millimeters larger in total circumference. And if you put them side by side, you can actually really see the difference. Like, I'm going to line up the outlet valves, and as you can see, that is at least a millimeter taller, at least on cameras, if you can see that. So yes, the main way to tell the two apart, other than by obviously very carefully studying the size, is if you look inside the mask. I've already pointed this out in my M3A1 review, but there is a bit of a metal reinforcing band. So even back in the mid-40s, they were realizing that these things were prone to breaking and warping, and so they realized, hey, this needs some reinforcement. These things are going to get fucked up over time. So yeah, look for the ones with metal reinforcements, because I do know of two people who have successfully been able to make a M2-10A1-6 repro, the World War II variant, which is Johannes Muller of Gas Mask Lexicon. You can't really see it on his article, but if you look through his US section, the thumbnail will show an obvious repro, at least as far as I know. And then also Pixel Productions has also managed to make a reproduction, and that is because they probably had access to these later contract plastic diaphragm assemblies. So that's the main reason why it has been so difficult to reproduce the World War II variant of the M2-10-6. Now this info is thrown out there, and if people start getting smart and starting to do that, I'm a little bit afraid, to be honest. You're probably going to start seeing like rare World War II M2-10A1-6 optical mask or M2-10-6 optical. So for the future, I guess if you're seeing one for sale, the main thing you'll want to take note of is the date stamp. As far as I know, I have never seen a plastic diaphragm M2 optical with a date stamp later than 1945. All the ones that I've seen have a date stamp going as far as 1945, and the earliest C11 M2-10A1-6 here that I've seen is dated 1951. They were probably made earlier than that, or they were they probably were recycling the stock that they had, because these masks weren't really issued all that much. I've only seen, in my entire life as a collector, which is probably about 8 years and going, I've only seen one example, and that's actually this year that I've seen of an M2-10A1-6 that has been issued, and because it had the carrier all beaten up, everything was stained, and had a label on the filter with the user's name, and even that's not a reassurance, because it could have just been someone who bought one at a surplus store and decided to personalize it for whatever reason. But I digress. So back onto the original point, if you do see a M2-10A1-6 or an M2-10-6, as if you'd rather call it, with the plastic diaphragm angle tube, be sure to look at the dates, because now that this info is out there, I'm probably going to expect people to try and reproduce these eventually. So, as you can see there, or hopefully you can see, mine is dated 1952, made by Continental Rubber, and the hose is, interestingly, neoprene, recycled off of this is probably even a recycled World War II M2 optical hose, or maybe, obviously, just an M3-10A1-6 hose, which is made by Sieberling Rubber. But enough about that. This isn't a review, this is more me just rambling. So I hope you found that all enlightening. It didn't really add too much of substance to most people, but I guess hopefully it was at least interesting. So I'm Dick with 3D. Be sure to leave any comments, questions, corrections, or concerns down in the comments below, and I'll see you all later.